Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Victoria Esquimalt Police Board meeting. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement that we are on the homelands of the Lekwungen speaking people, the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Victoria Esquimalt Police Board meeting.
Well, that I'm hearing a background.
We are on the homelands of the Lekwungen speaking people.
I'm hearing an echo of the meeting.
Everyone, welcome to the Victoria Esquimalt Police Board meeting. Well, that I'm hearing a background. We are on.
Okay, we'll try that again. I was echoing on someone's machine somewhere, so welcome. And I was just doing a territorial acknowledgement, acknowledging that we are on the lands of the Lekwungen speaking people and that we're working with the Songhees and Esquimalt even as we implement board and provincial policies on their lands. And so just keep in mind, and all of us keep in mind, the work of reconciliation that's underway while we do our work here this evening. The first thing I need is a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Thank you, Doug. Seconded by Charla. We do have one change to the agenda. We've moved policy discussion from closed session into open session. There'll be an addition under the Finance Committee to discuss a speaker compensation policy. So can I have an amendment to add that to the agenda under Finance Committee? Thank you, Doug. Paul, seconded by, was it Doug? Did I see your hand? Okay, thank you. All those in favor of that amendment? Any opposed? Okay, none opposed, that carries. And I need, I guess, now a motion to move the agenda as it's been amended. Thank you, Jeff. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Sean. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Okay, before we get into the business of the board this evening, the board in our strategic priorities has taken it upon ourselves to do a number of things, but one is to educate ourselves about equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism, anti-Islamophobia. And the board had a very good training session earlier in the year, and we wanted to share some of what we learned with the public. But rather than saying it ourselves, we've invited our guest here to make a presentation for the public. So I'm going to turn it over to Zainab if you want to introduce yourself and walk us through your presentation. And again, you've got you're live on YouTube and anywhere else that the public may be watching. So thank you so much for taking the time to come back. We really enjoyed the initial training session, and I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and share your slide deck and walk us through your presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Zainab Martinez. I am a Canadian Muslim woman, grew up right here on the island, and I have been an active part of the Muslim community and grassroots activism for probably half my life now, so about 16 years. And so right now I'm currently studying at Camillus College, the Community, Family, and Child Studies program, while I continue to work within the local Muslim community, particularly through the Muslim Youth of Victoria Islamic Center and Dar al-Ihsan. I'm going to jump into the presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. One moment. And we will jump into my little presentation here. So as you all know, we have had a devastating track record of Islamophobic violence in Canada lately, particularly with the Quebec City Mosque shooting several years ago and the Afzal massacre in the summer. So we're going to have a quick look at explaining Islamophobia in Canada. And this is the basic agenda. We are going to have a condensed version, so I'll kind of skip through the details of some of it, but the presentation slides will be available and will be made available to whoever is interested. So first of all, what is Islamophobia? Islamophobia in Canada, gendered Islamophobia, Canadian political Islamophobia, systemic Islamophobia, Islamophobia in Victoria, and action items. And those last two bits are going to be very relevant to the police board. So first of all, what is Islamophobia? So the very basic short form definition is the Ontario Human Rights Commission defining Islamophobia as stereotypes, bias, or acts of hostility towards individual Muslims or followers of Islam in general. And I would also include those who are perceived to be Muslim, for example, turbaned Sikh men. The Commission also regards Islamophobia as the idea that the Muslim community is a greater security threat. And this particular bit is going to be very, very relevant to when we start talking about systemic Islamophobia, especially at the political level. So Islamophobia is both local and global. It shows up in political policies in arenas such as Canada's security certificate process, Quebec's Bill 21, the American establishment of Guantanamo Bay, which unfortunately the Canadian government was complicit in, sent Omar Khadr over there, along with multiple other examples of the Chinese government's concentration camps for Uyghur Muslims, India's Hindutva's calls for genocide against Muslims, and much more. It exists on the level of media, news headlines, radio hosts gleefully allowed to spew hate speech against Islam Muslims. It's a really huge issue, especially here in Canada, particularly Quebec. And of course, Hollywood. Islamophobia exists in public schools. Muslim students are routinely experiencing bullying and discrimination from fellow students and teachers alike, and on post-secondary campuses. It also exists on public transit, the healthcare system, and on the street. So Islamophobia in Canada, and this part is going to be, again, very relevant to Victoria Police. So hate crimes. Statistics and surveys show that reported hate crimes against Muslims surged in Canada after 2001. Over 170 hate crimes were reported in 2002. And in the year 2000, there were only 11 such reports, marking a nearly 1,500% increase in just 2 years. And of course, since then, it's gotten significantly worse over the last 2 years in particular. And again, 2021 saw just record-breaking amounts of hate crimes against Muslims, specifically Black Muslim women in Alberta. And then, of course, on June 6th, 2021, a Muslim family of 6 murdered by a man who drove into them with their pickup truck, and the murder was motivated by Islamophobia. And it's also important to note that online cyber hate, in both media bias, hate crimes, and just the internet, has been on the rise during COVID, which is a factor that we should all be keeping in mind. So this is a little statistic from Global News. It does not include statistics for 2021 and 2022, unfortunately, which is where we see a sharp rise. Gendered Islamophobia, so there's the profiling of Muslim men and specifically hate crimes against Muslim women, often targeted towards hijab and niqab wearing Muslim women. Between December 2020 and July 2021, there were at least 7 hate-motivated incidents. Actually, this number went up over recent months, unfortunately, investigated by Edmonton Police, all involving Black Muslim women in hijab. So gendered Islamophobia is found in how Muslim women are also spoken of and to, whether in interpersonal communication or at a systemic level. And the profiling of Muslim men happens by law enforcement and security agencies. They're assumed to be violent, a threat to national security. Muslim men are routinely harassed by surveillance spies, put on watch lists, even when they are proven innocent. Canadian political Islamophobia. I hate that I have to skip through this so fast, but there's so much to talk about. It's been going on for decades. So we've got multiple proposed niqab bans at the urging of Stephen Harper, Jason Kenney. We had the Barbaric Cultural Practices Act, which targeted specific practices that are associated with Islam and Muslim countries and cultures, however incorrectly. Quebec's ongoing Bill 21, which bars the wearing of religious symbols by some public service workers in positions of authority, including teachers, police officers, while on the job. And this has already resulted in one hijabi teacher being forced out of her classroom. And then we've got Canadian politicians' resistance to formally recognizing Islamophobia. Doug Ford's government actively blocking the motion to condemn Islamophobia, which is quite horrifying. And I assure you that the Muslim community is not oblivious to this at all. We are very, very aware of it, and we're keeping an eye on this on these political trends. And now, Islamophobia in Canadian media is often misleading, has skewed portrayals of Muslims in particular when sharing news items about acts of violence that are allegedly committed by Muslims. They're overconnected, given excessive attention, while episodes of Islamophobic violence are rarely considered within the broader context of anti-Muslim hate. There's also disproportionate coverage for any violent crimes that are assumed to be associated with Muslims versus those who are not. So, for example, there were apparently 4 times as many articles in online Canadian media about the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing as there were about the 2017 Islamic Cultural Center of Quebec City shooting, despite the fact that the Quebec City shooting happened within Canada and was infinitely more fatal. Systemic Islamophobia, that means our Canadian government fully complicit in this, the federal government. It involves illegal rendition. So Canada's ongoing practice of extraordinary rendition, which is basically sending off Canadian citizens to black sites, torture sites, also illegal. It has resulted in the torture of multiple innocent men, most notably Maher Arrar, and a Canadian inquiry later found out Canadian investigators were guilty of creating and providing false information. They lied about Maher Arrar. Arrar later received $10.5 million in settlement with the government for its role in his torture. The government still has not stopped the practice of extraordinary rendition. Then we have the security certificates. They've been abused in order to violate human rights of multiple Muslim men, including the secret trial 5. And these 5 men were never, ever charged with a crime. They were incarcerated for years. They were denied due process. And even after release, they continue to be harassed and monitored. We've got surveillance and entrapment, CSIS, RCMP, and even the CRA have all been actively engaged in targeting Muslims, Muslim student associations on campuses, approaching mosques, and literally being involved in hiring moles. And we've got the CRA targeting Muslim charities and organizations. And this sounds again like, oh, well, that's the federal government's problem. That's happened right here in Victoria. Like I said, I grew up here, been very involved in the mosque here. I have witnessed this firsthand, not even secondhand, firsthand. So this is happening right here in Victoria, which has so many consequences for the Muslim community and how we feel about government institutions, whether it's federal or provincial or municipal for that matter. Now let's talk about Islamophobia in Victoria, which is a really big deal. In Victoria, we've convinced ourselves we're not racist like that. We don't have those kind of problems. And while Victoria doesn't have the same stats that bigger cities do, we do still have plenty of racism and Islamophobia to contend with, unfortunately. So the Muslim community in Victoria has experienced over a decade's worth of surveillance and attempted entrapment. Very well known in the community, also very easy to tell when a mole has been hired and sent to fish around for information. We've had the case of the would-be parliament bombers. So John Nuttall and Amanda Kurodi, they're the only ones who made the news so far in a case that was exposed to be illegally created by the RCMP. And again, less publicly known, but known to our community are the many other attempts at sending moles into the mosque, or more damaging yet, the recruitment of Muslim community members to harass and threaten other Muslim community members under the guise of security. And these practices are extremely dangerous, demonstrates the systemic Islamophobia's attempt at creating terrorism where none exists. And it's also a clear example of colonialist practices of inciting betrayal amongst members of a particular group to make them vulnerable and easy to manipulate. The other very serious issues that we face here in Victoria is violent threats against Muslims. So I personally have had a man on the bus, so public transit, threaten to attack me with knives. Nothing could be done. He wasn't ID'd. I got off the bus before anything could happen to me, thank God. I've been harassed multiple times verbally. Even when I had my daughter, she was like 4 years old at the time, and I got screamed at in the streets and sworn at for being a visibly Muslim woman and told as much. You don't deserve to be here. Why are you here? Take that off. We don't want you here in Canada. Harassment at school. So in my community work, I work a lot with Muslim children, and we have noticed that there are so many younger Muslim children. We're talking about between the ages of 8 and 15, some of them even younger. They've reported being harassed, discriminated, and bullied at school by both teachers and peers, specifically for being Muslim. And bullying statements, bullying included statements such as being called a terrorist, told go back where you came from. Discrimination from teachers included being penalized for being bullied. So when the student would go to a teacher and would say, hey, this student is bullying me, they'd be told, well, don't get into fights. And there were no consequences for the bullies. A teacher has, in at least one case that we try to pursue further, the teacher made an inappropriate comment about being bombed, targeting specifically a Muslim student, a visibly hijabi girl. And when she and her parents tried to pursue it, the teacher said, well, you misunderstood my comment. I didn't mean it like that. And that was it. The school board didn't pursue it further. Then there were teachers telling Muslim students they don't have the right to religious accommodation, particularly when it came to physical education, accommodations for swimming, both boys and girls, by the way, as well as sex ed classes. And then Islamophobic content in the curriculum, comments made by teachers about barbaric Muslim countries that are ignored when students or their parents try to address them. And additionally, hijab pulling, verbal abuse. Muslim girls and women here in Victoria are having their hijabs pulled off by both strangers and acquaintances. So, for example, other students at schools, and usually accompanied by verbal abuse. Many of these incidents are not reported because anyways, they aren't considered to be criminal actions. And a lot of the time, the victims fear of being further dismissed and discriminated against by law enforcement and others. Then we've also got Islamophobia in social services and healthcare. I'll have to skip past that, unfortunately. So action items. Now that we know there's a problem here in Victoria, what can we do about it? And this is the part where it's very important for law enforcement and city councils to know what concrete steps must be taken to combat Islamophobia in Victoria and subsequently across Canada. So first of all, cultural sensitivity training regarding Islam and various Muslim cultures. This is especially necessary when you're dealing with sensitive situations such as domestic disputes, medical crises. And here in Victoria, we actually have a variety of Muslim cultures. The dominant ones, particularly in Victoria, include Somalis, the South Asian community, Syrian community, and other Arab communities. And of course, you're all aware we have much, much higher rates of Syrian refugee Muslims present in the community now. So very necessary for public service workers to be aware of sensitivities related to hijab, to parenting, gender dynamics, and a distrust of law enforcement. So please remember how many Muslims come from various immigrant backgrounds. They fear legal authority because of the tyrannical countries they came from. Those governments, by the way, were directly supported by Western forces, including Canada. So there is, a fear, like the law enforcement here is going to be like the law enforcement back home. The community center that I work with, Dar al-Ihsan Islamic Center, we do provide such sensitivity training. We urge you to seek it out as soon as possible. And now specifically, record Islamophobic incidents as hate crimes in police reports. So legally, you're not obliged to do so. But if you do ever have a Muslim come in and report a hate crime, or even a non-Muslim come in and report a hate crime that has Islamophobic elements to it, whether it's verbal harassment, hijab pulling, anything else of those Islamic components, please make a point of noting this detail. Also, don't just direct victims to the RCMP hate crimes unit. We already know Anthony Statham. There's not much they can or will do. We have repeatedly been told, we can't do anything about it. Go talk to your local police department. So usually Vic PD. And so, it's a runaround. We don't like it. It adds to the element of not being taken seriously. It adds to the sense that, we are disposable victims. And finally, many, if not most Muslims, they do distrust law enforcement and feel with good reason that we won't be taken seriously if we report anything that happens to us. I've had to report within the last 3 years, probably maybe 4, like I said, about 3 different Islamophobic hate incidents, the most severe of which was being threatened to be stabbed on the bus. And it really didn't go anywhere. And so what message does that send to victims? And too many of us, again, like I said, had our concerns dismissed. We're told nothing can be done. It wasn't really technically a crime, just move on. And this attitude perpetuates systemic Islamophobia. It fosters a very strong sense of anger, distrust, and even fear towards law enforcement. So knowledge, proactive engagement with all Muslim organizations and community in the region is also necessary. For example, in Victoria, we know primarily city council, police department, whoever tends to work with the BCMA Masjid al-Iman. Please be aware they're not the only representatives of the Muslim community in Victoria. Again, Dar al-Ihsan Islamic Center, we are another Muslim community center. We have, quite a demographic of our own. Very important to connect with everybody. Otherwise, there's a sense of favoritism. There's a sense of, oh, the city doesn't care about us. The police don't care about us. They only care about those Muslims over there that, they already have ties to and, who support them. And the rest of us, they don't trust us. They're out to get us. They're not going to take us seriously. So again, that really unfortunate issue of collaborating only with one group to the detriment of others. The experience, unfortunately, that we've had where some community members with relationship to law enforcement has threatened to intimidate other community members with that relationship. And again, it's just a vicious cycle of systemic Islamophobia. So please be aware of this particular element of this dynamic. Realize that there's a lot of trust building to do within the Muslim community. And that covers the main presentation. We've got a resource sheet. So like I said, I will make this available to all those who are interested. And yeah, that covers it. Any questions, concerns, anything at all?
Thank you very much for your presentation. And again, I'll just note for the public, the board has had a longer version of this presentation and some questions and discussion, but we did want to make sure that the public was also aware of A, what the board had learned, and B, experiences of Muslims in Victoria and that wider context. So thank you so much for your presentation. Chief, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you again for your presentation. And I think you're aware that, the Victoria Police Department is working actively with the Muslim community on many fronts. I really like your reminder that there's more to the Muslim community and there's different areas than just perhaps going to the masjid through the imam. So that is really, really helpful for me. I'm actually going to be attending, and I've attended a number of sessions just on through the Intercultural Association. There's another one coming up on Thursday morning about racism in Victoria. So that will be touching on Islamophobia and a lot of other kind of racism that's happening and what we as community leaders and police organizations can do. I just want to say, I appreciate your honesty, the stories that you told. You were very quick in kind of presenting them, but each one of them draws kind of an emotional response. And I can only imagine the fear that it has, and it's challenging. And I know we've got lots of work to do. And I wanted to just let you know that as chief of this organization, the Victoria Police Department is committed to doing that work to bridge the gap, build the trust, and even working with the Muslim community and identifying what are some areas that what we can do to enhance our service that we provide, because there's a lot of myths out there. Like you said, you're calling the RCMP hate crime unit when they're directing you to the local police organization, which, by the way, always we need to make sure that message gets to the community is the local police department is the first point of contact in incidents like this. And we need to make sure that we're doing our best to respond and take a lot of the comments that you're making very, very seriously and do better. So thank you for your presentation.
Thanks, Chief. Yeah,
Thank you for
the
that.
board felt the same way. It was a good reminder that there are many different elements of the Muslim community, and engaging with the mosque itself, the masjid, doesn't mean that we're engaging with the whole community. Zainab, did you want to add anything further before you wrap up?
That pretty much covers it. Like I said, I really appreciate that you all took the time to be here today and to hear my presentation. I'm also available to anyone who wants to pursue further discussions or other presentations for elements of the community or the police department, if not the police board. Like I said, work with Dar al Ihsan Islamic Center here in Victoria, BC. We're located in downtown, actually, on Government and Bay. So please, I can actually make my email available as well. So that's going to be bintyunus@muslimyv.ca. So yes, please reach out anytime. We are more than happy to continue the discussions and have further engagement.
Wonderful, thank you. Before you go, I think Sean has a question or comment, and then we'll release you to your evening and continue with our business. Sean, go ahead.
Thank you, Marion. Thank you. I just want to echo what Chief said. Thank you very much for your presentation. Of course, we had a much longer, more detailed presentation by yourself, and it was very, very impactful, I have to say. And the board came away with a lot of interesting discussion. At the end of the day, the board, as the Chief has said, we are continuing to be allies of the Muslim community. There's so many different multifaceted areas of the Muslim community. I understand as a Sikh male myself, I understand exactly what you're saying. So we'll continue to support the community and find ways to collaborate with you and support you. And please keep us posted of any events or any drives or anything that you wish to get the word out. We'll be happy to publicize and help you and collaborate with you if you feel like we're a good fit for that as well. And we will be very respectful of that. And I understand you mentioned you have a new location or something. So if there's something, if the office you mentioned, but if there's a grand opening or something, as COVID allows, we would love, maybe one member of the board and the mayor, we would love to attend and show our support for the work you're doing. And we understand for a lot of us, we do these things off the side of our desk. You're no exception as well. So to you and your family, thank you for giving us your time and your energy for this. And I hope we continue to build a better community for all of us. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you again, everyone. All right, take care.
Have
Bye.
a good evening. Okay, we need to move on now to the adoption of, we did the adoption of the agenda already. Oops, I went in the wrong order. Okay, but we have not yet adopted the minutes from the 25th of January meeting. So I need a motion to adopt the minutes. Thank you, Sean, seconded by Doug. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Okay. Chief, we'll turn it over to you. You can give us your update as well as the equity, diversity, and inclusion engagement update. Why don't you just run through all of it, and then we'll take questions and comments on all of the above.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that, Chair. So I'm referring to page 3 in the package, which is my Chief Constable's monthly activity highlights. And I just wanted to let you know that I had the privilege of attending 2 different Vic PD Civic Service Award ceremonies, and those ceremonies, as the board is aware, are meant to recognize citizens who have gone above and beyond in keeping our community safe. And so it's a great way for us to connect with our community members and acknowledge their heroic efforts. I've also spent a lot of time engaging internally within our own teams. And so you'll see in a number of entries where I've attended the different patrol watch briefings, community services division. I met with the detective division earlier this morning as well. So really trying to focus internally on supporting our people as we are in year 2 of COVID and addressing some of the staffing challenges and the workload pressures that we're seeing throughout the organization. Wanted to highlight I had the privilege of presenting the final Victoria City Police Athletic Association, the Junior Basketball City Championship. So as the teams are moving on to the islands and then eventually the provincial tournaments, the winner on the girls' side was St. Michael's University, and on the boys' side, Oak Bay. And so had the privilege of watching their final games and presenting the trophies on behalf of the Victoria City Police Athletic Association. Just on an operational front, I wanted to highlight a couple investigations. One particular that comes to mind since the last police board update was our strike force unit seizing upwards of 2.5 kilograms of drugs in a search warrant. And so, these are high complex investigations with a high rate of return, but the harm that they cause in our community is second to none. If we're looking at the opioid illicit drug overdose crisis, and you look at the number of deaths that happened in this particular investigation, there was 1 kilogram of fentanyl and significant quantities of cocaine and methamphetamine that were seized. The street value of this 2.5 kilograms, just to put it into dollars, is estimated at nearly $270,000. What's also interesting, and why I wanted to highlight this particular investigation, is that as the investigation progressed, we were able to identify that the drug traffickers had ties to the Lower Mainland gang conflict that's occurring, and here they are operating in Victoria. A couple other updates. I wanted to the one I wanted to just touch on really is the number of protests that we're seeing. There's no secret. There's a number of protests that have been occurring around the country in support of what's happened and what was happening in the city of Ottawa, and the Freedom Convoy and the truck rally. In addition to that, there's been other protests, but that really has taken up the bulk of our resources pretty much every Saturday. At the height of it, there were thousands of people and up to 600 to 800 vehicles that came on the 4 weeks ago. Subsequently, the numbers have dropped, but they're still quite significant. The last one was 600 individuals this last Saturday that marched through downtown, had speeches, but the disruption that a lot of these protests cause is with a excessive honking of the horns, boisterous crowd, and what we're having to manage and maintain kind of a level of deconflicting two sides is that there's many counter protesters that are showing up to these Freedom Convoy protests. And so, and many of the counter protests are frustrated and they're upset, and their views don't align with those that are the protesters at the BC legislature. So we've had to really deploy strategically and de-escalate many confrontations between protesters and counter protesters. Again, as the board is well aware, our role is to remain neutral and to have a high level of impartiality and a high degree of professionalism. We do exercise a tremendous amount of discretion, but we have been writing a significant amount of tickets that we've been written for a number of traffic violations where they're warranted and where it's safe to do so. It's been really trying on citizens, regardless of whether you're a protester or you support the counter protesters, but we've been doing the best job that we can with the circumstances that are presenting themselves in. And as the board is well aware, there is a significant emotion involved in many of these protests, and we're finding that these protesters, and many of them are quite divisive and are quite polarized on topics, and so it's been challenging. The one thing I also wanted to point out for this last Saturday, which was a bit different than the 3 past Saturdays before that, is that this last Saturday, although the numbers were low and the protesters were about 600 and the vehicles about estimated between 150 and 200, we did notice that the tenure of the crowd was a little bit less family friendly, that they were significant amounts of false narrative that was being spread amongst the crowd about what had happened falsely in Ottawa and what the actions that the police were taking in removing some of those that were entrenched in Ottawa. And we did notice kind of a level of less cooperative, less friendly, and less kind of supportive of police protest. And that was certainly a difference to the tenure of what we saw in the previous 3. So I'll leave my comments at that, but I'm happy to take any questions. I do want to just share with the board that the officers and our staff at the Victoria Police Department continue to work under tremendous pressure with staffing shortages and high workload, and we are doing everything that we can to make sure that our officers remain healthy, that our staff are supported in the execution of their duties, and we're doing everything that we can to make sure that we're able to maintain our continuity of operations under difficult circumstances. Thank you, Chair. Now, do you want me to just, I think you wanted me to roll into the EDI as well, is that correct?
Actually, that felt like a lot. So why don't we take time now to have any questions or comments on your report, and then you can go into the equity, diversity, and inclusion work. So questions or comments for the chief. Paul, go ahead.
Chief, thank you very much for the report. I avoided the area of the groupings over the weekends, but I did notice a number of cars and trucks on the streets that obviously had been there that had, and especially I noticed Confederate flags, which is really a symbol of white supremacism. Is that, has the issue of that type of extremism caused you any concern?
I think we're always concerned. Anytime that you have protests that are displaying and promoting any type of racism or discriminating against Canadians, as you know, we're a diverse country, and that does cause us concerns. I just want to ask Inspector Carolee Jones or Inspector Grant Hamilton, who was on the ground on Saturday, how prevalent were those flags, and how prevalent, and is there anything that you want to share with the board just to highlight what I may have said or what you wanted to kind of see from what you saw on the ground?
Inspector, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I mean, I'll defer to Inspector Hamilton, who was in the command post certainly much more than I was. I think it's just important to highlight that in these situations, regardless of what the protest is, it brings out, I mean, we're a very polarized society right now. And I think that that's a lot of what we're seeing. There were a number of different, and even to highlight one thing for sure, is that even amongst the trucker convoys, that they are themselves divided into a number of different groups. And so then you get the counter protesters. We had probably 3 or 4 different segments of society that were coming out, because it's an opportunity for people, regardless of what the initial protest is about. It's an opportunity for everyone to come out and speak what they've been feeling now, particularly for the last couple of years, and especially the last year. Grant, do you have anything to add more specifically?
No, thanks, Carrie. I think you commented on it very well. There is a lot of diverse opinions there, and our focus is ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to say their piece and it's nonviolent and trying to minimize as much disruption as possible. But it is a challenge right now. It is, like as the chief mentioned, the tenor is changing from the previous weekend.
Thank you. Paul, anything further? And then I'm going to go to Bella and then Jeff. Have we lost Paul? There he is. Go next. Okay, Bella and then Jeff.
Thanks, Paul. I just wanted to say thanks for those comments. I think it is very concerning seeing those symbols kind of represented in our communities. And I just wanted to say thanks to Chief as well for all your and your officers' work this weekend and the past weekends. As you said, it's been a lot of protests and demonstrations this year. And I just really appreciate your comments on making sure that we're staying neutral and impartial during those times. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Bella. Jeff?
Yeah, I wanted to just highlight something that Chief said earlier, that misinformation campaigns and kind of propaganda around that is becoming more and more as part of the organizational staple of preparing these. And I and a bunch of members of my family over the weekend were actually using the Vic PD Twitter account quite frequently to understand where things were going on. And that didn't stop basically us trying to get to our car and having people yell at us and do some intimidation factor because we were wearing masks, as we put our kid into the car. And all of that kind of got us thinking around something that would, a suggestion for the Twitter account and social media profile for Vic PD around, things that we were thinking about that in particular come down to, not only the activities that are going down, but also what are some of the rights, where protesters are well within their rights, fantastic. And then where the Vic PD is seeing stuff where, things kind of exceed, some of those rights and kind of commenting on that. I think it brings awareness and education to the population on where you guys see things going okay and where you guys see things, not going okay.
Thanks, Jeff. Does anyone want to comment on that? Yeah, Chief, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's a delicate balance, allowing people the democratic right to be safe, peaceful, lawful. But what we're now seeing is protesters having strategic objectives, which aren't safe or peaceful, and in many cases, lawful. And so it's a challenge. But I will tell you that that's why we put CCTV cameras up. That's why we have officers that are monitoring. A lot of times we can follow up with enforcement action. We obviously are there to keep the peace and to prevent any offenses that are happening. But it becomes a significant challenge. And I think with knowing that protesters have strategic objectives and they're willing to cross the line is much different. And the tenure is much different and the tone is much different. You are not going to make the front page or get headlines if you're standing with a placard at the side of the road. And that poses challenges for all police organizations across the country. So maintaining a high degree of professionalism, having discretion, but knowing when enough is enough and when we need to act to either write a ticket or take enforcement action is something that is continually reviewed. And Inspector Jones was the goal commander in the command post, and she sets the strategic objectives of the day, and they're carried out through a proper executed plan. And I'm proud to say in the 170 protests that we managed last year and the ones that we've already done this year so far into mid-February, our officers have done an amazing job under sometimes very, very trying circumstances. We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't in many cases. And so walking that fine line can be quite challenging and quite draining for the officers that are actually on.
Thank you, Chief. Any other comments on Chief's general update? Okay, let's move on to the equity, diversity, and inclusion update. And again, just for the public, the reason this is here is the board has set equity, diversity, and inclusion as a key strategic priority, as has the department. And we think it's important that we report out monthly on the work that the chief is doing in this regard in the community and also in the department. For the most part today, I think we'll be focusing on the in the community part. Chief, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So I'm referring to the bottom of page 3 in your package. I wanted to just highlight that the Victoria Police Department had community representatives donate a canoe that we were seeking to purchase to build relations with our Indigenous communities. And so there's a tremendous amount of work that we're undertaking to make sure that the canoe project is blessed and that we are engaging the Esquimalt and Songhees nations in how the artwork would go onto that canoe and engaging both of our communities. And I've made presentations to both chief and council in moving this project forward. So we had a meeting on the 31st of January with Inspector Mike Brown, Deputy Laidman, and a couple of Vic PD members and myself, just furthering that initiative forward. I had the privilege of meeting with Deputy Laidman and Staff Sergeant Jen Ames, who, as the board is aware, is the co-chair for the Greater Victoria Police Diversity Advisory Committee, the new executive director for the Victoria Pride Society. Black History Month is February, as you all know, and I attended on Saturday a webinar that was on the history of anti-Black racism in Canadian schools and universities. And Mayor Helps, you actually provided opening remarks for that particular session. I've been working with the Victoria Multi-Faith Society on a number of months, probably 6-7 months, on developing some an anti-racism toolkit. There's a number of community leaders. I'm the only police representative on this group, and we're quite proud of some of the work that we've done as a larger community on helping the Victoria Multi-Faith Society. And we're kind of nearing the end of that project of what these toolkits look like and how we can make sure that they're embraced in community and shared widely. I met with the rabbi reached out to me and I met with the youth team at the Shabbat Center last Tuesday evening and attended the virtual meeting, Mayor, with you. Mayor Helps on being Muslim in Victoria, and as you know, there's an action plan on the panel on Muslim voices that the Greater Victoria Police Diversity Advisory Committee is going to engage on, as is the city and the mayor at Saanich as well. So just proud to see that the work we're doing. There'll be more face-to-face meetings than online meetings, I would suppose, with the lifting of many of these restrictions. But I will make sure that the board's updated on my future updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for the chief? Okay, thanks for that update, Chief. We move on next to committee updates. And Colette, can you remind me who we're starting with, which committee?
It should be governance up first.
Okay, and Sean, are there recommendations coming from governance?
Yes, hi, Mayor. Yes, there is a motion, which I'll read. It's regarding our board strategic plan. Just so to let the public know, the board has a strategic plan, which is about, usually it's every year, but we made a 2-year plan because of COVID and whatnot. And we had a session recently to review our strategic plan, sort of a check-in and see where we're at. And we know some of the language could have been updated a little bit better, and we have done so. That's why we have a motion here, particularly around the framework agreement. And for those who don't know, the framework agreement is an agreement between both the Esquimalt Township of Esquimalt and the City of Victoria in terms of funding and budgeting the two departments for the overall department for both communities. Now, that's a high-level sentence. It's a little more detailed than that, but the information and documentation of the framework agreement is available online. But I'll read the motion. The motion says that the board amend the language of 7.1 of the 2021-2022 board strategic priorities to the new language, which is amend the framework agreement to include a co-chair policy as part of the agreement. So, Mayor, that is the motion. And
Okay.
I'm looking to move that. And
So
yes,
Sean is moving the motion. Is there a seconder? Okay, seconded by Jeff. Thank you. And just for the public, you'll probably all, if you're tuning in for the first time, you might not know this, but Mayor Desjardins and I co-chair the police board. And we've worked out a policy that the board adopted in 2014 to go back and forth with Esquimalt as the lead co-chair for 2 years, then Victoria as the lead co-chair, then Esquimalt, and so on and so forth. That is not written into the framework agreement, but I will, and to give myself a timeline, I'll bring, my job is to bring a motion to a board meeting to make this so. So I'll bring that to the March board meeting for the board's consideration to amend the framework agreement to have that co-chair policy in place. So that's what this refers to specifically. Is there any discussion on this motion? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. And then I'll just reference for the public, each of the board committee chairs is tasked with giving an update on the board's strategic priorities. I'm not going to ask each committee chair to go through all of them because they're quite detailed, but in the package here, you see a report from each committee chair with an indication of which of the actions under their responsibility have been completed, and then a little update about what's ongoing and what's going to happen next. So again, I'm not going to ask each committee chair to go through those reports. I will thank them for writing those reports and encourage the public to go through so that you can monitor the actions that the police board are taking. Sean, anything further from you?
no, Mayor, that's everything. Thank you very much.
Okay, Charla, HR Chair, I don't think you have any motions, but is there anything that you'd like to say or update?
So again, just referencing the HR report on page 8 of the package, and all of the outlined goals in there are not just the work of myself, they're the work of our HR committee members, which ultimately is the entire board. So that's just a good tracking item for us. So if you're interested, check that out. And also the deputy chiefs are switching roles at the moment. So Deputy Chief Watson and Deputy Chief Laidman. So Deputy Chief Watson will be working more on the operations lens, and Laidman will be taking on Chief Watson's duties, and this helps them become well-rounded in the department. They're both highly skilled individuals doing a fantastic job. So we're really excited to see them in these new roles and see their skills in different areas.
Thank you, Charla, and thanks for all your work as committee chair. And finance, as noted when we amended the agenda, we did move one thing from closed to open because there was no reason for it to be enclosed. And it is a proposed policy for compensating speakers, given that we are undertaking a bunch of training for ourselves. So Doug, why don't I turn it over to you to introduce the policy since it's coming from your committee. We can have a motion to adopt it once you've explained it, and then there may be some board members who have questions or wish to make amendments to the policy. So please go ahead, and Colette, thanks for putting it up on the screen.
Thank you very much, Chair. Appreciate it. I do have, including this item, I do have 6 items on my my report. I do want to elaborate a bit on one of them, but this is the first item up, I guess. It's called the speaker remuneration or speaker fee policy, and the committee has suggested, and I want to thank Director Sean Dillon for this, that the board adopt a policy or a protocol, I think is what we've chosen to call it, to actually pay a stipend or a fee to speakers under certain conditions that are, people that make presentations to the board or committees, and the policy is written as shown up on the screen. So the motion that I will make is that the board adopt the speakers remuneration protocol as outlined in 220222 memo to the board, and I guess needs a seconder.
Okay, is there a seconder? And please verbalize if you're seconding, because the screen's up, I can't see everyone, so.
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay,
Jeff.
seconded by Jeff, thank you. Okay, Doug, go ahead.
Well, I guess do you want me to elaborate on this at all, or just ask for any questions?
Sure, just if you could just outline kind of the key tenets of the policy.
Sure, okay, I'm gonna find it first, hold on.
It's up here on the screen for you.
Yeah, no, I know, but I got it on my computer as well.
Okay.
So So the committee is suggesting that consideration be given by the board to create this protocol that permits select speakers or presenters to be remunerated for their presentations or training sessions to the board. And payments would be by fee or a token of appreciation, and they must be processed in compliance with respect to income tax regulations and legislation. So we would consider, and any fees to be paid to a speaker or presenter need to be approved by the board at each instance. This is not a blanket approval. So the speaker remuneration would be appropriate if they're a guest speaker, if payment is a quote, thank you or a gesture of goodwill and appreciation for individuals conducting a seminar or a workshop, or payment to a volunteer for their assistance at a board event. It would not be appropriate if there's any agreed upon amount between the individual or its organization and the board, as this would be more like a contractual arrangement rather than a volunteer thing. Secondly, if the board is obtaining the services of a professional speaker or consultant who performs the requested service for a living, that's not appropriate to pay that person or organization a fee either. And of course, if the speaker is a Vic PD employee or a board member, it's also not appropriate. The maximum what we're talking about in fee is accumulated up to $500 per year. So, it could be, if the speaker or presenter is on more than one occasion during the year, it's still maximum $500. And any amount exceeding this amount would be treated as income, requiring appropriate deduction of taxes, etc. So the procedure would be that payment is made by check or e-transfer, and amounts under $50 could be made by way of a gift card, where if it's approved by the board, the approval has to be by board motion and must specify the amount and the form of payment to be made. And any payment requests, once they're approved, will be made through the board EA, that would be Colette, who will then forward the request to the controller, that would be Steve, for processing. That's the protocol in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for the public's information, the genesis of this is for the past 2 board meetings now, we've had speakers. I believe Fran Hunt-Janucci was present from the Aboriginal Coalition to End Homelessness in January. Zainab was here today, and we're asking people to come and educate ourselves and the public and feel that some kind of token of our appreciation and payment for their time is warranted. But we didn't have a policy, so that's why this is here for our consideration. So it has been moved and seconded. Any discussions or amendments to the policy? Paul, go ahead.
Yes, I would make an amendment to strike bullet point number 2 under procedure, which is the awarding of gift cards. I'm
okay. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Oh, okay. Sean is seconding. Okay, Sean's seconding for discussion. So go ahead. Thank you.
I'm opposed to awarding gift cards as remuneration only because I think it is, while it does show some appreciation, I think it's a limited way of doing that. I think it's more respectful to the speaker to provide general remuneration that they can use for anything that they see fit. So for that reason, even though I know that giving gift cards is something that has other organizations do, I think that it is more appropriate for us to just think about giving a straight remuneration in terms of cash or check or other type of currency.
Okay, thank you. Doug, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments, Paul. I respectfully disagree with you. I think that, under $50, it's not generally inappropriate for somebody to receive a gift card as a gift or a fee, if you want to call it that. It is nominal. We all recognize that. It is not uncommon in the corporate world where I came from. When you're paying somebody a bonus or a suggestion box type of thing to use gift cards rather than money. But the important thing here is amounts of 50 or less may be made by way of a gift card where approved by the board. So if the speakers come on and say, I'll take a gift card, and the board approves it, that's okay. But if the board says, well, no, we're going to give you cash, doesn't matter how much it is, it's still up to the board to decide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, I will call the question. All those in favor of the amendment? Oh, sorry, Charlotte. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I think I'm in favor of this as long as Doug is saying, we have that option of making that choice. I know in my work in Indigenous relations, sometimes people offer a gift card in lieu of a honorarium, and culturally that's not necessarily appropriate. But if we have the item in place to say a gift card is not inappropriate here, we would like to offer a check. If we have that in place, then I support the current policy.
Okay, thank you, Doug. You're muted, Doug.
Son of a gun. Just to clarify, Charlotte, in the procedure on the second page of the protocol, it actually says amounts of 50 or less may be made by way of gift card where approved by the board. It's in there. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. So the proposal on the table right now is to amend the policy to strike that bullet. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of striking that bullet with respect to gift cards? Okay, Paul is in favor. All those opposed? Okay, opposed are Doug, Charla, Jeff, Sean, Bella, and Michaela. Okay, so that fails. Anything further on the policy? Okay, I will call the question. All those in favor of this protocol that we're adopting? Are there any opposed? Okay, none are opposed. That carries. And for the public, in case you're wondering why Mayor Desjardins and I are not voting, it's because the Police Act renders us neutral in these instances. So I probably say that at least once per meeting, we cannot vote on any of these matters. Doug, you do have a number of updates from Finance Committee, so I'll leave it to you to decide which ones you'd like to highlight for the public. And for the public, there's a lot of information here in terms of our finances year end. Actually, sorry, I'm stealing your thunder, Doug. Why don't you give a high level of what's here and then dive into what you want to?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I will defer to Steve to give any high level on the financials, which is Finance B, C, D, and E. However, I do want to have a brief update on the Finance Committee's report regarding the strategic priorities. And this is on page 10 of our package. And it's action item number 3, oversee the development of the multi-year staffing plan. Subsequent to that report, myself, Deputy Colin Watson, and Steve Hercombe, our controller, did meet by Zoom to discuss the next steps on this thing. And the three of us landed on it. We think a very good sort of a 4-part process on this, whereby, sorry, I'm flipping notes here. The department is already sort of maintaining, has already written and maintaining sort of an environmental scan of the department organization. They will continue to do that and update that probably at least annually. And in that, they're also going to highlight the demand mitigation strategies that come out of this thing to mitigate any issues or problems or challenges. And I would add to that, I'm going to, hopefully we will be able to include and quantify and include objectives and benefits of any investments that are made or recommended to be made in staffing or IT or other, other resources. And then the third part of this 4-part plan is coming out of that, then the department annually comes up with a long-term staffing needs assessment. And long-term, I'm thinking up to 10 years, by the way. And we all recognize that the further out you get in the years, the more simple guidance and overview it becomes. But it's to give the police department and the board and both municipalities insight into where we think we're going to go in terms of staff needs, not just next budget year. Although nobody can commit to more than a year out, I think it's always good to have a vision as to what we think it's going to look like based on what the current environment is, based on what the current challenges are and the mitigation of the challenges, and based on measuring the objectives and the benefits of any investments we make in our organization. And then fourthly, all of that can magically, I'm being funny, turn into a financial forecast, we believe, using some fairly simple modeling out 10 years. That's what that's the commitment I made when I'm during the presentations for the 2022 operating budget. And this is kind of where we're at on this thing right now. So stand by. I think we're going to be coming back to the committee, at least through the committee, fairly soon. We think this is a very long process to get this thing off the ground, but I think we're making some good strides. Two other comments I want to make on this is, I do understand that Colin will be handing off this piece of his work to Jason. So welcome aboard, Jason. Sorry to see you go, Colin, but I think we're off to a good start. And lastly, and I hope the board's okay with this, I've asked and he has agreed, Jeff is going to participate as well in this, I call it ad hoc process before we come to committee, to again, another objective skilled eye on which direction we think we're going. And I think Jeff's going to provide some really good insight into this thing. So with that, I'll leave it unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Doug, for that very thorough update and for all your work on this. Are there any questions for Doug on the development of a multi-year staffing plan as kind of a key strategic objective of the Finance Committee? Okay, thanks, and it will continue to give the public updates. In the report, Finance Committee, we also have the year-end overtime report, the monthly overtime report, the preliminary year-end financial report, and the monthly financial report. Doug, are there any of these that you think need to be highlighted? Or maybe, Steve, I should turn to you. Maybe the year-end overtime report is worth kind of diving into just a little bit. Again, it's all there for the public for transparency, but if there's anything you wanted to highlight on that report, the rest is monthly and the year-end is preliminary. So why don't you just give an update on year-end overtime, where we're at, and anything else you wanted to share?
Sure, just very briefly. So at the end of the year, we were at roughly 15% over budget on overtime. That was more than offset by being under budget in wages and benefit due to staffing shortages and high number of officers that we have on compensable injuries. Two main drivers behind that. $480,000 over budget in terms of frontline overtime. That's patrol, beat, and bike. Obviously, that is driven by the need to fill our shift minimums on our front line, maintain our service levels. And also emergency response team, public safety unit activations combined, $268,000 over budget. Those continue to climb as we see the higher need for those services and more protests and more complex situations to deal with. As I said before, though, those are more than offset by being under in our wages and benefits. So just to remark on our year-end financials, as you mentioned, still finalizing year-end right now. There were a few entries that have been gone through since this time. Right now, we're still looking at a $680,000 surplus. And obviously, that is driven largely by the staff turnover and the vacancies that we have in so I'll just leave it at that if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Again, the board got to go over these in Finance Committee, but they're now here for the public for transparency and for review. Are there any questions from any board members? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on then to the board co-chairs update. And just for the board's knowledge, the board has been meeting since 3 o'clock in various iterations. I've checked with staff and we don't need to go back into camera. So we'll just finish the public meeting and the last item from in camera can be bumped to next month. So just so everyone can know what's going to happen in the next little while. Or we'll wrap up our meeting quite soon. Board co-chairs update. What I have to report on behalf of myself and co-chair Desjardins is, and it didn't make much news because it's kind of a boring governance announcement, but finally, after 5 years in the making, last week, the Integrated Units Regional Governance Council was launched. And this is a consortium of all the mayors in the region, both RCMP and municipal to oversee at a governance level the integrated units. And it might be worth actually either next month or the month after having a presentation for the public about what those integrated units are, what the terms of reference for the committee is. It is not the integration of policing in the region, but it's oversight of the units that are already integrated. And importantly, the discussion of how we can collaborate as a region as new units and new shared policing services are needed. So it's co-chaired by Mayor Murdoch, representing the municipal police departments, and by Mayor Screech, representing RCMP detachments. And it's off to a really good start. Some really solid terms of reference. Police leadership is involved as well, and so is the province. So 5 years in the making. There was a press release that went out last week that if the board didn't get, you should have, and if you haven't yet, you will. But I think that's some good news for public safety in the region. Barb, anything else that we wanted to say that I might have forgotten?
No, except that I really don't want to correct you, but in fact, this is longer than 2 terms. So it's actually about 9 years when this all started having discussions.
Okay, so 9 years.
But we are off to a really great start.
We're off to a good start. There we go. It took a while, but here we are. It does take a while when you're doing that level and depth of collaboration and coordination. Okay, next we're going to go to the BC Association of Police Board Directors update. Charla is our board rep to the BC APB. She also happens to be the president. So Charla, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. We are in the process right now of planning our conference with the goal of being in person. Our meeting's on Friday, so I don't have very much to report right now, but once we have our Friday meeting and our committee determines exactly what we want to do to move forward, we'll be quite busy planning this, and it is in person, which is very exciting.
That's great. Thank you very much. Next question for board members, board member engagement. Again, this was a pre-pandemic item that was added, so board members could report on what they had heard or seen or done when they're out in the community on behalf of the police board. It's not been an exciting 2 years in that regard, but nonetheless, we do keep it here because there are some engagements that board members may have virtually or anything they wish to share. So I will turn it over to board members and ask if there has been any engagement that you'd like to share into the board meeting here. Okay, I will take silence as a no. Board strategic priorities. These are here every month, but in particular this month, the chairs have provided their quarterly updates. Again, I really would encourage members of the public to read the chair's quarterly strategic reports. They highlight the work that the board is doing on behalf of our communities. And then also here, just for our information, is the framework agreement. And we did discuss earlier in the meeting, I'll bring a proposal to next month's board meeting for the board's consideration to amend the framework agreement in the spirit of the co-chairs as we've been operating here for the last 7 years. Anyone else have anything else on the framework agreement? Okay, seeing none, the last item here is a letter from Police Services requesting by March 1st an indication of the number of officers that we recruited in 2021 who came to us fully trained. So this was just put here as correspondence. Maybe Chief or Colette, could you comment on A, what is the number, and B, can you, on behalf of the board, make the submission to government by March 1st? Yeah, Chief, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you for that, Chair. We don't have the numbers. I know that Inspector McCrae and his HR team are just compiling what the numbers are to comply with the BC, for the changes to the BC provincial policing standards. And in addition to that, they just, Police Services just wants to track where the training was completed for these experienced officer, just to make sure that it's done at an accredited police academy across the country. But when we have the numbers, we can share them with you. Unless Inspector McCrae has the numbers.
I actually do
okay.
have the numbers. I was able to get them because in 2021, the numbers were actually relatively easy. They were only 2. And as we know, in 2022, though, we expect the number to be significantly higher. We have a lot of people in our exempt recruiting process, and I anticipate that those numbers are going to increase drastically. We will be completing the report on your behalf. In fact, I think Staff Sergeant Gubbins already wrote it. and it will be sent to police services as required.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And with respect to 2022, it's because everyone wants to live in paradise and work in the best police department in the country.
So we think.
Well, your board agrees. Okay, with that, final word, unless anyone else has anything else to end on, I will call for a motion rather to adjourn tonight's meeting. Thank you, Charla, seconded by Doug. I want to thank the board members for your commitment today, to our staff and senior leadership team and those out on the front lines. Thank you. We know this continues to be a challenging time. So thank you, and particularly for your work out there on the weekend. Hopefully we'll see less traffic downtown this weekend, but really do want to thank you on behalf of the board, and to thank the public for tuning in this evening, and join us again next month. And with that, I hope everyone has a good evening. All those in favor